Good afternoon. It is Thursday, May 21st. My name is Todd Williamson. I'm the branch manager of the Milton Library, part of the Fulton County Public Library System. This is our Thursday afternoon book break and adult story time. So it's a little after 4 o'clock. We're going to give some folks a couple extra moments here to get connected with us. So I'm glad that you could join me today. I see a couple folks that are logging in right now. We'll give them a couple more moments to get started. I'll introduce myself again in a second. And we'll get going with our adult story time today. So again, my name is Todd Williamson. I'm the branch manager of the Milton Library, part of the Fulton County Public Library System. This is our Thursday afternoon, 4 p.m. adult story time. We call it book break. Just join us in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. We do have some other library staff that are kind of back channeling the comments, so they'll be able to chat with you back and forth as I'm reading today. They have some things that they're going to post about the book and this quick excerpt that I'm going to read today as well. There's a link to an online exhibit that's put together from the University of Virginia and our colleagues at the Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections Library that's going to talk about the Armed Services Edition paperback books that were given to American GIs during World War II. So the book I'm going to read from today, the excerpt is When Books Went to War, the Stories That Helped Us Win World War II. So it is going to be a quick excerpt, probably, let me see, about 8 or 10 pages total. This is a book written by Molly Guthill Manning, and it was published in 2014. So when I stumbled across this book, shelving it about a year and a half or so ago, and it just kind of struck with me, and I grabbed it off the shelf to read right away. So again, we got about a handful of folks that are joining us right now. I'm sure some other folks are going to jump in here. So let's go ahead and get started with our story. So again, reading from When Books Went to War, the Stories That Helped Us Win World War II. And this is a history of the Armed Services Editions. These were little paperback books that were given to American GIs during World War II. There were approximately 122 million copies of these books that were printed and distributed to American soldiers and sailors and Marines. Over 1,300 titles were published, including titles by Charles Dickens, F. Scott Fitzgerald, John Steinbeck, William Faulkner, and the excerpt we're going to read from today is dealing with Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. So if you're not familiar with A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and pardon me with my brief little summary of that book, but A Tree Grows in Brooklyn tells the story of Francie Nolan, who's a young girl who's trying to make the best of her difficult life and her routine daily life in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, New York. And Francie struggles to keep her hopes up and to try to persevere despite the odds that are against her. So you can see how perhaps the American GIs made a great connection with Francie as a character, as they were dealing, of course, with some insurmountable odds against them at times as well, too. So clearly the American soldiers, they grasped a hold of that book, and we're going to read a little bit about some of the letters that were written to the author as well, too. So let's go ahead and get started reading. Again, When Books Went to War, starting on page 104. Got my handy dandy little notes here. So Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was perhaps the most popular ASE in its Armed Services edition of them all. It provided such vivid account of childhood that many men felt as though Smith were writing about theirs. When word spread that Smith had published an essay, Who Died, that personalized the thousands of Normandy casualties, servicemen wrote to her begging for a copy. Smith received a steady stream of letters from men around the world, thanking her for the effort her writing had on them. The effect her writing had on them. When I first picked up your book, I was down in the dumps, a sad sack, as the boys say, a sergeant said to Smith. But as he read, my spirits rose until the end I found myself chuckling over many of the amusing characters. He needed that lift that A Tree Grows in Brooklyn had given him. He had felt depressed and lonely for months, and nothing had given him any relief from those feelings until Smith's book. I haven't laughed so heartily since my arrival over here 8 months ago, he said. A man in the Army Air Forces said that of Smith's book made him feel homesick, and that it was the first time I've ever been homesick in my life. He was amazed at how capably her words transported him to what life was like back home, a life that he sorely missed and hoped to return to. Yet he did not write to complain. After being in the Army only a short time and reading all types of novels and classics, I can sincerely say that after reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, my cup runneth over. Many of the letters written to Smith echoed these sentiments. One man in the 716th Bomber Squadron felt as such a strong connection to Smith's characters that he compared A Tree Grows in Brooklyn to A Good Letter from Home. From a hospital, one man wrote that A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was a source of never-ending enjoyment. To him, it was reminding him of his own childhood in Brooklyn. To me, he said, the book was like living my life over again. Another man wrote in hopes that Smith might be nursing another literary seedling into full treehood. Smith's publisher received a note from the serviceman who previously did not care for books. But for the first time, I found a book I really enjoyed reading, and that's Betty Smith's novel named A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. He wanted to know what other titles she had written, and thanks to Smith, books are one of the rare pleasures, he said. As with other books, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn also helped eclipse some of the everyday irritations that could get on a soldier's nerves. In one spirited letter from R.H., Betty Smith got an earful about an annoying bunkmate. R.H. lived with happy-go-lucky Gus, who one day waved a copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn before him and declared, This is a fine book. Gus calls everything fine, complained R.H. He doesn't seem to know any other adjective, and he uses the word indiscriminately. His girl is a fine girl. Dragon Seed is a fine movie. His buddy is a fine boy. A B-29 is a fine plane. It's a fine day. Almost every time he opens his damn mouth, fine pops out, R.H. said. And I grit my teeth and pray. R.H. joked one day that he might be driven to the point of punching poor Gus, but it wouldn't do any good. I can see him now, picking himself up from the floor and laughing, not able to believe I'm really angry, and saying, Gee, that was a fine blow you floored me with, friend. Well, getting to the point, R.H. said that he began reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and it made his exasperation with Gus melt away. I haven't the power to tell you, as I'd like, how it has affected me, R.H. disclosed, but I know this from now on. I won't be annoyed the least bit with Gus when he speaks of it and calls it fine. Smith once estimated that she received approximately 4 letters a day from servicemen, or about 1,500 letters a year. She responded to almost all of them. Servicemen were shocked when they received a note from her, sometimes accompanied by an autographed photograph, a common request. Without fail, these mementos became treasured possessions. From a hospital, one man wrote to Smith, Thanks for your letter. It had come at the perfect time, for he had a rough week coming up. Every doctor in the place wants his cut. I don't know what they'll do with the remains of me after the carving's done. Pour gravy on me and put an apple in my mouth, I guess. Smith's letter would give him courage through the surgeries he faced. When I received your letter, one man wrote to Smith, I thought, well, Betty has sent a Christmas card like the usual celebrities, thinking they're only doing something for the boys, but lo and behold, there's Betty Smith herself. I'm still bragging about it. I told the fellas it was my first wife because they're not familiar with your picture as I am. After carrying Smith's photographs with him from Germany to Belgium, the same man who kept regular correspondence with Smith was forced to ask for a new photograph. I'm going to need another one because I've carried this one around with me in the snow, rain, mud, and combat until it looks like it's been through a war, he said. Another regular wrote to Smith and also found great comfort in her photograph. "You helped inspire me during some of my most trying days of battle and battle fatigue and depression. The picture I carried of you that helped me remember the one I loved," referring to his wife, "and inspired me to carry on for better things in life that I was fighting for," he added. "Your tiny picture helped give me the sincere happiness and joy I needed while I was on what might have been the last limb of my life." Months later, after this man was wounded in battle, he wrote to Smith and convalesced in a medical unit, and again insisting what a difference she had made in his life. He and his wife planned to have a child when he returned home, and if it was a girl, they said they would name her Betty Smith. Smith and the council, who were so inundated with letters about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, that the council decided to reprint the book. "I think it's wonderful that the Armed Services edition is going into a second edition," Smith told a friend. "Most of my mail is from servicemen overseas, and without exception, they say everything in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn seems so true. It's not like reading a book. It's like being home in Brooklyn again. Some letters bring tears to one's eyes," she admitted, "and I am very much touched for the servicemen away from home, thinking so much of this book. I feel that I have done some good in this world." Moving on to page 126, as we continue the story from some GIs and the editions on A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. One commanding colonel felt a duty to share how A Tree Grows in Brooklyn helped him and a group of his men keep their mental bearings while under attack. The colonel commanded a light attack battalion, which he defined as an anti-aircraft, anti-tank, anti-personnel. He explained that. "Not long ago, I was down inspecting one of my batteries in a pretty tough position and was in a gun pit when some Germans started in on us with some 88s. It wasn't very pleasant waiting for them to come in after their whistle first sounded and waiting for them to bust everywhere. Anyway, I noticed one GI reading in between bursts. I asked him what he was reading, and he told us A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. He started to read us a portion about giving the baby a Gussie, part of the book, and we laughed like hell between bursts. It was sure funny. They all survived that German attack, and this commanding colonel decided to read the book for himself. He rummaged around to find a copy, and when he finally succeeded and began reading it, his unit again came under attack. Our column got hit by a battalion holed up in some woods above a road, and we hit the ditches, and we had a fierce fight. The commanding colonel admitted that he could not help but feel a temptation to read more of what while they were pinned down in a pretty tight race. But I had to get up front and give a few orders and start them over the hill. The fighting continued throughout the day, and although he was ultimately wounded, thoughts of the book's protagonist, Francie Nolan, and Brooklyn, New York, kept intruding. I was thinking about that book under pretty intense fire, he said. It was that interesting. Although he was never much of a reader before the war, by way of background, he said he had attended the United States Military Academy and was never in the West Point Library except for by order. He liked A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I sit here, dug in a blacked out command post tent in the front somewhere, and I write this with sheer gratitude. Moving on to page 164. Another source of pressure for more books was the Special Services Division. Burdened with the responsibility of providing morale-boosting reading material to Americans stationed around the world, Special Services officers feared they would not be able to meet the demand for books as servicemen faced redeployment. At a 1945 meeting of the 200 Special Services officers, it was estimated that more books were needed to the scale of one book per man per month in combat areas. In the words of General Joseph Byron, who headed the division, ASEs were the most important morale work done by the Special Services Division. One Special Services officer who had worked with the combat troops for over 2 years grew so worried about the men he supplied that he wrote the council begging for more books. He insisted there never seems to be enough of them, and the combat troops were starved for titles by Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck, Sinclair Lewis, but the men never stopped talking and asking for A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. So that's our quick reading from When Books Went to War. The Armed Services paperback books were about the size. This is our normal everyday paperback size that we have now. They were a little bit smaller than that. They were approximately 6 inches by 4 inches, so roughly the size of this. They were put together on the short end of the book. So when you open it up, pages read this way, and they were printed in columns through there. And so small enough to fit in pockets of the soldiers. And ultimately, when the soldiers came back from the war, publishing houses realized that paperback books were going to be popular and that they were going to continue to print paperback books over and over again. So I see that there have been some comments on through there. So that concludes our reading for the afternoon. There's a short reading for us. There's a quick introduction. I'm going to read that. We do have a little bit of time in through here. I'm sorry I didn't prep this earlier. But the introduction in through here from the author, I'm going to read this for you as well. And I should have read this first, but I didn't realize the timing of this. Sorry about that. So the introduction of the book. Were you ever so upset emotionally that you had to tell someone, sit down and write it out? A Marine asked in a letter to the author, Betty Smith. That's how I feel now, he confided. You see, I'm 20 years old, but I feel twice that age. I went through hell in 2 years of combat overseas. I just wanted you to understand that despite my youth, I have seen a little bit of suffering. At the time this Marine wrote his letter, malaria had ravaged his body and he was hospitalized and confined to bed rest. Yet he credited the illness with saving his life. During this time in sick bay, he was given an Armed Services edition of Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I read it twice, and I'm halfway through it again, and every time I read it, I feel more deeply than I did before. Ever since the first time, I struggled through knee-deep mud, carrying a stretcher from which my buddy's life dripped away in precious blood. I was powerless to help him. I felt hard and cynical against this world and never felt sure I would no longer be able to be capable of loving anything or anybody, he wrote. He went through the war with a dead heart and a dulled mind, believing he had lost the ability to feel. It was only as he read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn that something inside him began to stir. I can't explain the emotional reaction that took place. I only know that it happened and that this heart of mine turned over and became alive again. A surge of confidence had swept through me, and I feel that maybe a fellow has a fighting chance in this world after all. I'll never be able to explain to you the gratitude and love that fill my heart in appreciation of what your book means to me. It brought laughter and joy and also tears, although it was unusual for a supposedly battle-hardened Marine to do such a thing, to weep over a piece of fiction. But I'm not ashamed, he said. His tears proved that he was human. After reading this book initially, I had never read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and I quickly went and I grabbed a copy of the book. This book, When Books Went to War, is available through our digital resources in Hoopla. So, with your access to Hoopla, there's no wait list. So there's ebook copies and audiobook copies available, so you can listen to that one. And with A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, again, copies are available on both our digital resources in Overdrive and in Libby and Overdrive, and then with Hoopla as well. So remember, with books that are in our Libby platform, you might have to get put on the wait list for them. Things in Hoopla, there's no wait list, so they're going to download to your device immediately for you to read. So again, I hope you enjoyed our reading this afternoon. A quick little excerpt from When Books Went to War, and specifically about Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Remember, right now, all of our digital programming that is going on with us, you can connect with the Fulton County Library System through our social media platforms. So join us on Facebook, on Instagram, and Twitter. Make sure you like our pages so you get the most recent information that is out there about our programming. So some of our digital programming includes, on Mondays, we have kitchen chemistry. So we'll help you with some cooking dishes. I think this week we did popsicles and some green bean salad. Tuesdays, we have Fitness and Wellness Tuesdays. This past Tuesday, we did a quick little yoga stretching class for us. Wednesdays is our Maker and Do-It-Yourself Wednesday. So this past yesterday, we did a tie-dye at home program, so you can do some tie-dye fashion at home. Thursday afternoons, of course, is our adult story time. Next week, my colleague Michelle Bennett Copeland will be reading. So we look forward to having her read to us next week. On Fridays, we have some teens and tweens programming called All Booked Up. Fridays, we also have a language lab, and we're learning how to speak Japanese. So you missed episode 1 last Friday, but you can catch up on our platform and you get caught up for tomorrow's afternoon's beginning Japanese class. Of course, we have our daily children's story time at 11 o'clock, Monday through Friday. So you can join us for that story time every day, Monday through Friday at 11 o'clock. And of course, our physical doors for our library still are closed, but the windows to our digital collections are open and available to you 24 hours a day. I'm going to jump into the comments after I end the live broadcast here and answer any questions that some of you might have. Thank you to the other staff who've been monitoring the comments while I've been reading. I appreciate your time and efforts as well, too. Again, it's Todd Williamson from the Milton Library, and we will see you next week, Thursday, 4 p.m. for Adult Story.